Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's been quite some time since I've done a live, and by quite some time I mean about 2 days, 3 days. I've been used to doing so many lives because so much is going on. Things are still going on, things are still crazy. I've got a cup of tea to keep me company. Can't complain, happy days. You guys are here, I appreciate that. Thank you for tuning in to listen to what is going on in the context of the Ukraine war, in terms of aid going to Ukraine, what they're doing in terms of military development. And actually, we're going to have a whole section on energy aid going to Ukraine today. Yeah, vive la France. France is getting involved quite a bit at the moment, I think. Possibly a bit of a change in, I don't know, speed. France is an interesting one. Emmanuel Macron has always been very much a supporter of Ukraine, rhetorically, and in terms of communicating the threat that Russia poses to France. And Russia's posed a lot of threat to France very obviously when the Olympics was on. Remember, we had issues with infrastructure and whatnot, attacks from France. They've had cyber attacks. They've had hospitals have been victim to the Russians and so on and so forth. So I think there's always been this recognition that Russia are the bad guys. At the beginning of the war, people were slagging off France because they seemed to be doing as much. And there's this idea that Macron was phoning Putin to try and, do deals with Putin and calm Putin down. And everyone was thinking, oh, Macron sees himself as a peacemaker and that he wants to put himself in the middle of all of the goings on and try and be the person to solve it all. And he got criticism for that. But later on, it turned out that it was Zelensky who had asked Macron to actually make those phone calls. So the criticisms that were leveled at Macron at the beginning of the war were actually unfair. And he was just doing what Zelensky asked him to do. And actually, when you see behind the scenes, when you see in front of the camera, Macron is just a really strong supporter of Ukraine. Now, the issue is that rhetoric and is that recognition, does that marry up with the amount of aid that France has given throughout the length of the war? And many people have suggested that France has not done enough compared to the size of their armed forces, the size of their military industrial complex, more precisely, actually. There's a lot of debt in French politics and economics, more so than, say, Germany. Have had a different history with their relationship with debt. Germany are now sort of turning up and being really integral in terms of getting aid to Ukraine from a European point of view. Other nations that are much smaller nations give a higher proportion of GDP. Aid is a higher proportion of GDP or whatever. As a proportion of GDP, give more than countries like France and Germany. So you've got your Baltic nations, your Nordic nations. But in terms of real terms, it's like America, the United States at the beginning of the war gave an awful lot of aid to Ukraine, huge amounts of aid. But they were a nation who had and have a massive GDP, a really big population, and huge stockpiles of weapons. And so they were more able to give more stuff, but actually as a percentage of GDP, we're giving less than other people, but you kind of forget that because they're giving more stuff, right? So France is in this position whereby the size of their population, economy, the rhetoric, the recognition of Russia as a bad guy, as a threat, have they given enough stuff? And the jury is still out because with some nations, it's hard to know what they're definitely giving. And France hasn't always highlighted what they're giving. They've given some important things like planes, right? That mustn't be forgotten. They're doing a lot of training of things like pilots. UK is doing this, other nations doing this as well, but just recognizing France. They have been involved in SAMP-T, and they've also given Ukraine first dibs on anything that they get rid of that becomes obsolete. So all of their VABs, their armored personnel carriers, are going to Ukraine, or at least Ukraine get the first dibs on them and other bits and pieces. And importantly, and this is where I was kind of going with this, they do an awful lot in terms of intelligence. And Zelensky admitted this the other day. He claimed that France is now responsible for 2/3 of the intelligence that Ukraine is receiving. Whether the other third comes from the US or other European allies, and the US is actually doing very little now in that domain where we were thinking that was where the Ukrainians were properly relying on the US. Just unsure at the moment. But can you put a monetary value on intelligence like that? If France is enabling Ukraine to be able to target, that's almost worth more than missiles that do the blowing up, as long as Ukraine can build their own missiles. So I don't know how to appraise France, or arguably many large nations that give things that go beyond just bits of kit, right? It's very difficult to get a proper handle on how much assistance they're giving to Ukraine. The same can be said for the UK, that has intelligence, that has a role in terms of coordination and logistics and training. An awful lot of training goes on that might not turn up in, like, here's an aid package worth $115 million or euros or pounds. And you're like, okay, the UK is Operation Interflex is training all sorts. They're training special forces. They're training pilots that then go on to train in France to do the basic jet flying, and then specialize in whether that Mirage or F-16s or whatever. So I don't want to criticize or say that France is better than they are. My conclusion is, history will tell. It would be really great to have an accurate appraisal of where France is in terms of military aid, but they're probably doing more than we understand that they're doing, because there's an awful lot of aid that goes to Ukraine that isn't just stuff. Which is a really long introduction to where we're going to start off. So, hi guys, please remember to like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate those who have already done so, and thanks to those who do so today. Keep yourselves in the loop. Right, let's now look at what France is doing. So the big news, two big pieces of news, but there's more actually. France has delivered its first Rodeur 330 drones to Ukraine, and one French automaker, car manufacturer Renault, is gearing up to produce 1 million of them by 2030. Wow. 2 people can assemble it in 3 minutes. It flies for 5 hours and finds targets on its own at a range of up to 500 kilometers. So here we have it. French automaker Renault will start producing long-range attack drones in France under the military project called Chorus. Production will take place at Le Mans, drone assembly and Cléon, the engines, under oversight of France's DGA, with the defense firm Turgis Gaillard. Capacity could reach up to 600 drones per month. Right, so what is that per day? Divided by 30, that is what, 20 per day? So that is super useful. Thank you very much. Scaling only if ordered. Now, this is the key, and this is always the key, it seems, with Ukraine. They often say, and talking about their own industrial base, they say, hey, we can make X, Y, and Z. Yeah, but we can only make that if they're ordered, and they can only be ordered if someone's got that spare cash and is willing to spend it on, in that case, Ukrainian manufacturing, in this case, French manufacturing. If tests succeed, the project could become a €1 billion 10-year defense contract, marking Renault's major entry into military drone production. And of course, this is great for a company like Renault, because they will be looking at diversifying at a time where, you're wondering what's going on with the car market. Is it going to keep expanding? There are so many Chinese manufacturers coming on. I've ordered to, okay, a bit of personal life here. We're a 2-car household because we have twins and they go to different sporting events, and my partner goes to work, and then I often need a car to do whatever. I work from home now, but I used to go to work as well. So we secondhand lease a car at the moment, which is cool. It's not brand new. And we've got this old Vauxhall Zafira on a 5-year hire purchase thing. and we worked out how much money we're spending each month on these cars. And for just a tiny bit more, because of some weird ass amazing lease deals, and because we only do minimal mileage, so although we use the cars a lot, we don't go very far with them, and I don't do massive journeys anymore at all. So we can have the minimum mileage, 5,000 miles a year, and then pay any penalties over that. But 5,000 miles a year for leasing is like the minimum you can get, and it means you get the cars really cheaply. So we're getting 2 brand new cars for the price of like our 7-year-old car and our second-hand leasing car. And it's just like, I've never owned a, well, not that we're going to lease them. I've never had a brand new car in my life before. We're getting 2 brand new cars, and we're not paying, like, that sounds really extravagant, but I'm actually paying just marginally more than I'm paying right now. It's just like, how can we do that? It turns out that we've got this Ford Puma on a lease deal it was so good that they stopped doing it because too many people were taking out, and it was really anyway. Both of them are going to be, there is a reason for me telling you all this. Both of these are going to be really cheap lease cars. And I was thinking really hard about the war in Ukraine and about global geopolitics, and I wanted to support cars that were manufactured in Europe, or preferably the UK, but also electric. So we're getting 2 electric cars, Ford Puma. And it turns out that then Donald Trump went nuts, and we ordered this Ford Puma ages ago. And I was like, oh, damn it, because Ford's an American company, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's made in Europe, the Ford Puma electric. So that's all. And the Renault, we're getting a Renault Scenic. And the Renault Scenic is a really cool electric car. And it's just, and I've got an amazing deal on it. So it's just like, I'm totally made up, like cheap as chips. But it's, for me, Renault was, it was really important to get a European car, actually. And it meant a lot. Ideally, should have got a British car, but British electric cars, there aren't many that are made. Like, there are car companies that make cars here, but not many electrics that are reasonably priced, unless I want to buy a Rolls Royce or something, right? So so it's really important for me, and I wonder how it is for you guys when you're making these big decisions, if it's a car, or smaller decisions on a monthly, weekly shopping basis, whether you're reacting to the war in Ukraine or global geopolitics, and whether that informs your ethical consumption, right? But in terms of car manufacturing, you're thinking, you know, with car manufacturers, they must be thinking there are so many. This is where I was going as well, is that China is invading. So I'm really big on electric cars, and China is just invading with really good products like BYD cars. They are really good, right? You get a lot for your money. I just don't want to support a Chinese company where I could support a European company. And you're looking at companies like Renault, who will be seeing like what China is doing with electric cars, and they're flooding the market with cars that are better than probably European manufacturers can make for that money, right? So this is what, so China reacted to Tesla, and they said, oh, we can make that kind of car. And then they made cars like Tesla. And then they realized after the initial models that they could make electric cars that were way better than Teslas, or at least had like more funky stuff, or were plusher. And they made much more luxurious cars rather than just really cheap Chinese cars. They were banging out really decent cars. Like BYD is a good example of this, and for less money. And that is a real threat to manufacturing. So anyway, this is all connected, because companies like Renault will be looking at the marketplace and seeing the influx of Chinese goods and thinking, if we don't diversify, we might struggle with our car manufacturing, and then that could be the end of us. We need to be making other things, like what can we make with these big manufacturing plants that involve engines and bodies? Oh, look, there's a massive war going on in Ukraine. How can we deal with that? How can we get in on that? And drones, there's going to be a risk to whether Russia look at something like these Renault factories and say, we could do a bit of sabotage there. So I wonder what Renault have done in terms of risk mitigation, risk management there. But it doesn't surprise me that Renault would do something like this, because I would do that if I was in charge of Renault. I'd be like, how do we diversify? How do we future proof? And also, can we get some big contracts off the government to provide drones for Ukraine? And I don't feel too bad about that, because Ukraine needs stuff like this. And then we can learn from that, and then these drones in this case can go to the French armed forces and so on and so forth. So you saw this with wasn't sort of similar. Rheinmetall looked at German automakers, car manufacturers in Germany, and they've got a couple of, because the German car industry has been suffering. So some of these factories have been going idle, and Rheinmetall have picked up a factory or two and using them. So you're seeing a replacement of car in industrial output, particularly in Germany, with military industrial output. And we're going to come back to Rheinmetall in a wee while, because they really have ramped up productions. Anyway, there you go. Sorry, that was going off on one talking about cars. And I don't talk about like what I'm doing and buying and whatever, but I just want to let you know that it was as cheap as possible. So 600 drones a month would be, if they could reach that'd be amazing for Ukraine. Now, it's not only that. So France has also delivered strike drones to Ukraine with a range of up to 500 kilometers. So the French company EOS has supplied Ukraine with Rodeur unmanned aerial vehicles. And this is where I'm a little bit confused, because Nexter reports this as drones that have gone, called these Rodeur drones with a 500 kilometer range from EOS, and then we've got Euromaidan Press saying that and a million of them. So these Rodeur 333. So whether this drone is a drone that is made under license by, or will be made under license by Renault, but is made by EOS, and Renault's going to ramp up the production of these, or whether these two claims are not consistent with each other. But the claim from Nexter is a French company, EOS, has supplied Ukraine already, therefore, with Rodeur unmanned aerial vehicles with this 500 kilometer range and 5-hour endurance, and they can be used for both reconnaissance missions and kamikaze strike drones, according to France 24. So these are pretty sizable looking drones by the looks of it. So that looks like a piloted. I don't know if that's a correct picture then in that article, but anyway, really good news for Ukraine. But it gets better, and we're going to stay in the air. Ukraine and France are working on a transfer of additional Mirage 2005 fighter jets. This is something I've been I go to bed, go to sleep at night thinking about, although more recently I've been thinking in terms of politics, but it used to be going to bed thinking about what weapons if I was in charge of the world, what weapons would I get to Ukraine as quickly as possible? And it always comes down to jets and Mirage. How many Mirages are there available in the global fleet of Mirage 2000F that the Ukrainians could be trained on and be given with ease? And I don't know the number here, but it's really good that the indications are that France are going to get some more Mirage 2000Fs, 5Fs to Ukraine. I don't know if that's some French dots. Other countries, a couple of other countries do use them as well as missiles for the SAMP-T. We know they're going to get a new SAMP-T NG, new next generation surface-to-air missile system that can take down ballistic missiles. And the existing SAMP-T, they have two systems. We don't hear much about them. We don't know whether they still exist, whether they need maintenance, whether they have been hit by drones or missiles or whatever. But anyway, they've got two SAMP-T batteries, and if they need new missiles for them, then one assumes they're still operating. Then the Kratal surface-to-air missile systems that they have been provided previously, but we hear very little about them as well. Missiles for those two. That's Mikhailo Fedorov, the new defense minister, announcing that the other day. And the training of pilots is continuing. The program is ongoing as well. That's a French ambassador to Ukraine saying that, confirming what we already know. More Ukrainian pilots are being trained to fly the Mirage 2000 fighter jet. He also added that, quote, intensive work is ongoing to deliver those SAMP-T NG, the next generation system, to Ukraine, and that France is absolutely working on strengthening Ukraine's air defense right now, actively and continuously. So all that is to say, France is doing a good job, or at least certainly appears to be doing a lot more than they were at the beginning of the war. Okay, then, so Greece and Taiwan, I think someone says that, Darren. Greece and Taiwan have Mirage 2005, and they're both going to retire. Yeah, so I would have thought they'd be getting some from there. If I remember correctly, France had a maximum of 24 Mirages, that 2000s, that they could get rid of. And they initially gave, I think, 6 in total. And there were some rumors that they could just get all of them. But it depends what the French needs are themselves. Okay, Germany. So we're going on to Germany now. The company FFG, which is Flensburger Fahrzeugbau Gesellschaft, obviously, has delivered at least 8 tracked armored combat support vehicles to Ukraine, according to Militiani. The vehicle has also been selected by the Netherlands as a basis for the new short-range air defense system. But yeah, so FFG have got some, I guess, new. I mean, it doesn't look that new. I mean, it looks rather similar to the M113 in design there, but maybe that's just, you know, basic APC design for whatever reason. But we also hear that Ukrainian soldiers have a completely new type of self-propelled artillery centered service with the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Now, they're due to get a bunch of these. In fact, let's go and look at deaidua.org / I think, is it EN? I don't know. Military assistance. So this is German aid to Ukraine. This is his website. What we're going to look at are the RCH. I'm going to do Control F, RCH, and we'll see that. Here we go. So this is planned delivery. So these are pledged deliveries, and the RCH here, they have 54. Now, if I remember correctly, these come in groups of, bear with me a second. These come in groups of 6. If I remember correctly, there's one fire command unit that goes with 6 of these. So got 9 command units going, and 6 each of these, 6 for every one of these RCH 155s. And these have a crew of 2 at the moment. A remote controlled howitzer, and they're, I guess, future-proof to be eventually remote controlled. These are 155mm howitzers. But I believe, a bit like the Lynx, did they not have a play around with one of these, and then they had to go back and adapt it or do something or make some change anyway? I'm not sure, 100% sure if that's correct, because the Lynx armored fighting vehicle had a similar sort of history where I think they're making Lynxes now for Ukraine, but initially they had like a test prototype or whatever, and then obviously the Ukrainians can give feedback on that, and then they can go and tinker around with it. And I don't know if that happened with the RCH 155, but anyway, I don't know how many of these they have. They did have one to train on, I believe, but anyway, it's a bit kind of vague here. They report a completely new type of self-propelled artillery has entered service. Perhaps it refers to the long-awaited RCH 155, though this has not yet been confirmed. So who knows? And I always thought this looked like quite a small self-propelled howitzer compared to, say, the Archer and the Caesar and whatnot. But it is, I think, by all accounts, bigger than you might think. That anyway, so that's good news, if that is indeed being used. Now, Ukraine has also ordered 18 of these Iris-T air defense systems from the German company Diehl Defense to strengthen its defense at the front. According to RBC Ukraine, the corresponding statement was made by Diehl Defense CEO at a conference on the 23rd of January. Somebody says 18 new Iris-T systems represents a strategic leap from point defense to regional dominance for Ukraine's airspace. This scale doesn't just plug holes, it builds an impenetrable defense labyrinth for Russian missiles and drones. Combined with existing units, this density pushes Russia's strike costs to an unsustainable level. So that's a really important point, and it's obviously much more positive than you might think. But what Ukraine is suffering with at the moment, as we all know, are missile and drone strikes, and they just need many more air defense systems as they presently have. and they've got quite a lot, right? They've got a lot of Gepards. They've got some Skynexes coming on, much more for taking out drones, but can take out, I guess, cruise missiles too. These good for drones, good for cruise missiles. I would have thought so, but they just need loads of them because the Russians are throwing in so many consistently every night, and then they just need all the interceptors they can get their hands on. So that's really good news. 18 of these, but the question is always, I mean, we announce these things, brilliant, I'm going to get 18 more of these, but they don't have them sitting on a shelf, right? So then you've got to make them. And is that a 3-year schedule? I don't know. Rheinmetall alone will soon be able to produce 1.5 million 155mm artillery shells a year, more than the combined US defense industry. Right, so people were worrying about the ramping up of European defense and American defense and anyone supporting Ukraine. It just takes time, and if you're going to invest as a private company in all of this infrastructure and capital, then you're going to really need to make sure you've got the orders there. And that has always been holding people back, but it has happened. It is like turning a tanker, but we've got to this point where this one company in Europe, this German entity, Rheinmetall, is now producing more 155mm shells than the entirety of the US defense industry. That is phenomenal. And you can guarantee that a lot of these are going to be going to Ukraine. But it's interesting because, I do wonder how much artillery Ukraine is using compared to, say, drones and what the needs are. Of course, the more artillery shells they have, obviously the better, because they can pepper. Then, as long as they have the artillery systems to go with it, but they can, I presume, then pepper the Russian forces with artillery. It's funny though, like we saw so much more footage of artillery strikes earlier on in the war. When we're looking at, say, columns of Russian vehicles going through fields, it'll be a case of hitting them with artillery, or maybe immobilizing one with a drone and then hitting it with artillery. Now everything seems to be done by drones. I see far less footage of artillery strikes, but anyway, 1.5 million is pretty useful from that one company, because remember, you've got BAE Systems, you've got Nammo, you've got the French providers as well. So the French don't provide as much, or they don't build as much, but they build good quality shells, if I remember correctly, and then so on and so forth. And then, of course, the Americans, and then the Czech initiative, which is still going on, even though the Czech government is being insanely bad. Staying on Germany, the Vector drone made by German Quantum Systems has just been awarded 3rd place for ISR, that's Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance Systems, at the Army of Drones 2025 event in Ukraine. So it's been recognized for the operational effectiveness of its ISR systems in active military service. So that's really good. They get quite a lot of these drones. In fact, if we go back to German aid to Ukraine and put in Control F, Vector, then look, 700 odd drones is what they've been delivered already. So they've received 700 of these drones. Then we've got spare parts for Vector. Then we've got another 235, I presume, planned. So yeah, so another 235 of these on the way, 700 gone already. That is really, really good. So Germany doing a good job there, and it's been recognized as like their 3rd best reconnaissance drone. Selection was based on the Brave One marketplace, where systems are selected directly by frontline units using e-points earned by frontline operations. Germany alone has officially oh god, it bloody says it here, 700 Vector drones to Ukraine. Actual figures are a lot higher, as these figures are from June 2025. Additional systems that were or are in use in Ukraine were privately financed or purchased directly by military units via the Brave One marketplace mentioned above. So German aid to Ukraine there, himself giving us the deets. And we're going to leave Germany now, go on to Norway. Norway has delivered critical missiles. I reported this probably the other week now. Missiles from its own stockpiles to Ukraine. In return, Ukrainian Defense Minister Fedorov offered access to Delta battlefield data and lessons from modern warfare that no NATO ally can learn any other way. So Ukraine has an awful lot of feedback they can give to nations who do help them out with missiles. You give us this, we'll give you intelligence, we'll give you information, we'll give you data that you can then feed back into wherever you want to feed it back into and improve whatever it is you want to improve. We might not have money, and this is what, is it Poland? So Poland is providing a bunch of stuff, and they are receiving drone technology and I guess drone information and data from Ukraine. That was in return for the 6 to 8 MiG-29s they're going to be providing for Ukraine, if I remember correctly. Now, the first European micro missile, the Mark 1, has shown the ability to intercept Shahed type drones, according to Militiani. It's expected that these missiles will be sent to Ukraine for testing. These look nice, don't they? Nice little missile. The micro missile caught up with the target drone at high subsonic speeds of over 1,000 kilometers an hour and hit it. Mark 1 with a solid fuel engine allows you to intercept targets at a distance of up to 2 kilometers. Not a huge range, but obviously, for a missile that small, it can't have that much capacity for fuel on board. The system is designed to defeat slow and low flying drones with propeller engines that develop a speed of 150 to 250 kilometers, as well as the faster targets with jet engines that fly at a speed of 450 to 600 kilometers an hour. So that's absolutely fantastic. That's what you need. Yes, we're seeing more and more of these jet drones, unfortunately, being sent by the Russians into Ukraine. So good news there. I just need to refresh my tabs because they're all being a bit funky, so bear with me a second. Thank you all again for being here and joining in. Right, here we go. So back to where we were. We're now moving on to Finnish Polish entity, and it's probably ICI. Oh yeah, there you go. It says ICI. I thought it was ICI, but anyway, Ukraine has expanded its cooperation and received new products for testing from the Finnish-Polish satellite imaging company, ICI or ICI. This goes back to the idea that France is providing 2/3 of the satellite intelligence, and also things like SIGINT to signals intelligence, so interceptions and all sorts of stuff. But there are other people involved. The Finnish-Polish group here, and I think I showed you some of their satellite imagery from maybe a month ago when they were sort of ramping up their assistance to Ukraine there. So that's fantastic news. The US Army, and I find this weird, but I'll tell you why in a second. The US Army has ordered 65 Commando select armored vehicles for Ukraine in $163.4 million 3-year contract with Textron Systems. The vehicles are built for high mobility in rough terrain and will support special and rapid response operations. I find this weird because unless somebody in the Pentagon is just lobbying on behalf of, or gets a nice kickback from Textron, I reported in my last 2, I think, military aid videos that Ukraine is now presently able to build all of their own mobility vehicles. Now, I know these look slightly different because I don't know. Commando Select. Let's look at that. Commando Select. Unless they are something very different in terms of, APC or things that we see that, I don't know, Novator or whatever, the Ukrainians are making, maybe even Rochelle and whatnot. Unless they are significantly different, then this is a sort of thing that Ukraine can build themselves, and therefore this is not massively something they're going to need. Textron Commando family of armored vehicles. Yeah, that looks like a pretty bog standard APC with whatever weaponry you can put on top. So this then, I mean, that's slightly different from a mobility vehicle, but I'm pretty sure that Ukraine could probably build this. Point being is that US have got $163.4 million there, and that money, in my opinion, would be better spent on ATACMS for Ukraine. Like if I was Ukraine, surely 65 of these vehicles are probably down your list of requirements right now. So I just find this odd from the United States as well. So the United States does have money baked into their appropriations bill. So they're like budget for the defense for the Department of Defense or war. They have their budget, and actually they get, what is it, 500 million that can go to Ukraine at the moment, this year, next year as well. I just find it bizarre that they've decided to do that, and that makes sense if somebody is on the payroll for Textron, because I'm fairly sure that that's a vehicle that it'd be great. They'll be like, yeah, thank you very much. We will use it. Of course we use it, and it'd be useful and it'd be great. But we probably need ATACMs more than we need them. Just, spend that much on ATACMs. Thanks. Tomahawk leverage inside quiet. I don't know if any of you agree with that. Yeah, soldiers will improve them, so they'll always get a little bit adapted, and you'll find that they've got like cope cages and whatnot whacked on them. But just the idea that Ukraine can potentially build all that stuff themselves makes it sort of less valuable. But anyway, Tomahawk leverage, Kiev Post reports inside with their title, it looks like, inside quiet push to arm Ukraine with America's longest range missile. So at the center of the push, so the idea is that there is still a quiet push to get Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. At the center of that push is Dan Rice, the president of American University Kiev and a former special advisor to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who met one-on-one with Pete Hegseth this last week. So Rice, behind the scenes architect of earlier efforts to win US approval for cluster munitions, which they did get, and ATACMs, which they did get, now believes the moment has arrived for something far bolder: a small undisclosed number of land-based Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking deep inside Russia. What he did disclose is striking. He directly asked Hegseth for Tomahawks, even a small undisclosed number, like Rice asks everyone he talks to in Washington. Would be nice, wouldn't it? I almost started ranting this morning in my hits and losses video, because I don't understand why Yellowbuga Special Economic Zone, why the Yellowbuga Shahed manufacturing facility is still standing. I just don't get it. Like, I don't get why, like, Shahed drones are causing massive damage every night. Like last night, how many drones got through? Was it 50 drones got through? Something like that. 60 drones? 165 drones, and they intercepted 103 of them, something like that. That's just unsustainable. Every night. That's like 900 drones a month at least, I would have thought, getting through. You need to not be relying on intercepting them. You need to be relying on them not being built. Now, they are going for explosive factories and semiconductor factories, but that Yellowbuga facility is still standing, and it's evidently very difficult to hit because it's very far away, and one assumes it probably has the best air defenses around it, because that is your target number one, right? But man, to have some Tomahawks or some really long range ballistic missiles would be nice, but cruise missiles that could take that out, that's what you need. Right, I was talking last time about this. So this Czech company called Aero Vodochody is offering its new L-39 Skyfox to Ukraine. So this is after the Czech president, Petr Pavel, came across and said, hey, we can get you some basic training or light attack aircraft that look similar to this. We can get you some from Czechia. And everyone's like, oh, that's cool. So Ukraine had expressed interest in purchasing 4 Czech L-159A Alka light aircraft, attack aircraft. However, the Czech government decided against the sale, stating they are still required by the Czech Air Force. Aero Volodchody noted that it can no longer manufacture the L-159A aircraft because certain components are no longer available on the market. Instead, the company offered Ukraine its new L-39 Skyfox, which is already operated by Vietnam, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. The Czech Aviation Training Center, CLV, where it is used to train Czech and allied pilots. Furthermore, at the end of last year, during the Dubai Air Show 2025, Aero introduced a new version of the aircraft specifically designed for intercepting and shooting down drones. The exhibited L-39 Skyfox number 0475 was equipped with two FN Herstal HMP 250 pods with a 12.7mm machine gun, two 7-round LAU-32 rocket pods capable of firing some rockets, including APKWS-2, and an optoelectronic Phoenix pod from Synab Technologies. The Phoenix pod is used for JTAC training, but can be expanded with electronic warfare, counter-drone, and counter-aerial threat functions. Compared to the L-59A Alka, the L-39 Skyfox offers lower operating costs. For the Ukrainian Air Force, the Skyfox would represent a modern, simple, and affordable platform, not only for basic pilot training, but also for advanced training and counter-drone operations. The L-39 Skyfox is even certified for training pilots for the most advanced fighters, such as the F-35 Lightning II. So it has a dual purpose. By the way, Grunge Thing, welcome to being a mod. I believe you're a mod now, so awesome. Thank you very much for being on board. This would be really cool. Now, the Czech government at the moment, the new coalition government headed by Andrej Babiš, is being really bloody annoying. They're not helping Ukraine at all. So the Czech president came out and said, yeah, we can get you some jets. Pro-Russian Czech prime minister told his top general, fall in line and know your place. He needs to know his place for backing jet transfers to Ukraine. So obviously the Czech army or the Czech Air Force, whoever it is, the top general said that was a good idea. Petr Pavel's idea was a good idea. And your man here said there are no L-159s and there won't be. It's a closed case, the prime minister said, really being very difficult there. Now, this leads one to hope that maybe there are some cheaper, although newer, cheaper to operate, light attack jets that could be used. I was also saying, and people have mentioned this from right near the beginning of the war, as soon as Shahed drones became an issue, the Brazilians make a light aircraft. What's it called? Is it Tucana? Is it the Tucana light plane? What is it? Super Tucano. Yeah, so this is it. So these are still used, like they're prop planes, but they're still used. And the Brazilian Air Force has them. And someone was mentioning them recently, some analyst, or is a country interested in them for the purposes of shooting down drones, I think. Like these are still a potential for Ukraine. They're still made. They're relatively, they started being manufactured in 2003. So you might think, really? But surely everything's jets. No, there is a place for prop planes like this. And they can work against things like Shahed drones. So I don't know, that's still on the cards at all. Okay, so there is that. Now, several samples of domestic microwave weapons, we heard about this previously, are currently being tested in Ukraine, according to Militiani. This is a type of weapon that uses powerful electromagnetic radiation in the microwave range to destroy equipment, including drones. So that's good news. And the Ukrainians are still offering very much the opportunity for countries and corporations and whatever to come and test their stuff out in Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine can help test them and get the advantage of using them on the battlefield as well, particularly if they are new and innovative pieces of kit. Zelensky said the Pearl program, which is the program where you can buy stuff from the United States and have it sort of, the idea is it's supposed to be expedited, sort of. I think it's supposed to be a rapid way of getting weapons to Ukraine by buying it off the Americans rather than the Americans giving it to Ukraine. It's already been delivering results and enables Ukraine to procure air defense missiles. He said the issue was discussed with the leaders of Lithuania and Poland, along with cooperation under SAFE. Now, SAFE is this, I wonder if what Zelensky's talking about here. SAFE is the new mechanism that Ursula von der Leyen proposed, and it got through, for that allows Europe to borrow at really preferential rates. That you've got 150 billion euros worth first, but it can go up to say 900 billion in total. And different nations can beef up their own defenses using that funding, but also use that funding to help Ukraine. Now, the issue will come with places like France saying, no, SAFE funding really has to stay inside Europe, inside the EU. So we're not going to be using that money to buy stuff through the Pearl initiative. But maybe Zelensky said, well, yeah, okay, but we really need some Patriot interceptors. In fact, France, I don't have it in here, but here's a bit of news too. So France has said they do not want the SAFE funding to be allocated towards buying Storm Shadow missiles from the UK to send to Ukraine. And this has annoyed people in the UK and annoyed, pro-Ukrainians. And you'd expect me to jump on with that as well. But no, the simple reality is, if you are European, if you are within the EU, if you're EU member state, and you are having your taxpayer money go towards something like the SAFE program, it's obvious that you are going to want that money to stay inside the EU. It's just obvious. If I was in, just trying to think of an analogy, like if I was giving money to someone, if I said, look, if I said to you, right? So I said to, I don't know, who's popping out there? So who's popping? Who's in the is in a chat? Said, who's popping, mate? I've got a t-shirt factory. You said you want some t-shirts. I'm going to lend you 100 quid. And you go, that's brilliant. Thanks, 100 quid. And then you go to the next city along and buy some t-shirts from there. And I'm like, hang on, I've just given you 100 quid to buy. I've got a t-shirt company. Why are you not? You need bloody buy your t-shirts off me. That's why I've given you 100 quid. So it's totally understandable. So it's understandable that France would say, no, you can't use European money to buy British Storm Shadow missiles because they're not in the EU anymore. And that was their choice to go out of, to Brexit, their choice to do that. So, deal with it. You need to buy, by the way, we build those same missiles in France and they're called Scalp EGs. You can have some of them on the SAFE, through the SAFE initiative. So loads of British people are kicking off saying, oh, you're not like, why Storm Shadows? It's like, yeah, Brexit, mate. And I don't want to start bringing Brexit into it again, but it's obvious that they're going to want that money spent on Scalp EGs rather than Storm Shadows. So it's just how it goes. I'd love it if they did spend it on British stuff, but ain't going to happen. Now, this is why BAE Systems have been trying to sort of jump through hoops to be able to access the SAFE funding. And we've had to make some compromises here and there so that our military industrial manufacturers can access that European funding. Now, the Prime Minister, talking about European funding, the Prime Minister of Belgium, Bart de Wever, has said this on the frozen Russian assets. Says the Russian assets will remain immobilized until the end of the war. He said, let me be very clear about this. If it were up to me, every single euro of that money would be used for reparations and for the reconstruction of Ukraine. I would be very sad to see even €1 returned to Moscow. We also have to face a difficult truth. Not all European countries are equally pro-Ukrainian. At some point, some may say they no longer want to prolong sanctions. If that happens, the assets would have to be released immediately. We are not at war with Russia. Europe is not at war with Russia. You cannot simply confiscate money. That is an act of war, and it should not be underestimated. It has never happened in history. Even during the Second World War, immobilized assets were never confiscated. There's an interesting moral issue there, isn't there? That actually that money belongs to Russia, rightfully belongs to Russia, but it's been frozen because Russia are doing egregious things. And does Europe have the right to be able to just confiscate that? from one country. That's like me going to my neighbor, me going around to Doris's and saying, Doris, you've really annoyed me. You've been having these late night parties that you and freaking Ethel banging music. Like, I've had enough, Doris. I'm taking your wheelie bins and I'm helping myself to your wheelbarrow. I'm confiscating it because you're having your music's too loud. Of course, the police would come around and say, look, you don't have the right to confiscate Doris's stuff. You're just a neighbor. You don't have the right to. So does Europe have the right to just confiscate? I mean, we might think it's morally good, right? We might go, yeah, I'd love that to happen. But legally speaking, and this is why I always talk about the difference between morality and legality. We can say it would be good if we confiscated that. Yeah, fair enough. But essentially, you've got to understand that we'll be stealing Russia's money. Now, I would still make an argument that that is a good thing to do. I advocate for taking all of Russia's frozen Russian assets and giving it to Ukraine. But from a legal point of view, it is arguably not legal. And that's the issue. So if Europe as an official international organization and these nations as part of the United Nations signing up to all the international charters and blah, 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 if we are arguing that Russia is breaking international law by invading Ukraine, and then we break the law ourselves because we think it's a good thing to do, then we are no better, at least in terms of merely breaking the law. We can argue that they broke it worse than we did. But the idea is that it becomes pretty problematic if we start breaking the law across the board. So whatever we do with the frozen Russian assets, and this is part of the problem, is people are trying to work out what to do with them that works within the framework of existing international law. And I presume Bart the Waver is just being pretty brutally honest here, saying, I'd love every single penny of that to go to Ukraine. But if we lift sanctions because a bunch of nations around the EU don't vote to not continue sanctioning Russia, then that money has to go back to Russia. Otherwise, it is just nicking it. So you can say what you like about Bart de Wever, but he's right. He's correct. So how do we get that money to Ukraine? There must be some legal, and of course there'll be lawyers working on this big time. But yeah, and they're mostly located in Belgium. So he says you cannot simply take someone else's money. We are not at war with Russia. I mean, I would argue that we are at war with Russia, and that's a thing too. So maybe one of the grey areas here is that actually we are at war with Russia. And do you know how we know that? It's because Russia keeps bloody attacking us with cyber attacks and this and that. And like all it takes is for us to recognize that aggressive behavior as being warring behavior. And then we say, right, we are at war. And I don't know if that changes the legality of something like that, because he's saying we aren't at war with them, so we can't do that. So would it just take us being at war with them for us to be able to? I don't know what the international law says about that. I can't imagine that just because you're at war, you can start nicking their money, even though they don't deserve, to retain that money because of the moral egregiousness. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole. Okay. Yeah, but this is the thing. Attacking another country is super legal. Obviously, that's the tongue in cheek there. That's sarcastic. Europe needs some balls, and here's the problem. Like having balls to do something like confiscate that money completely is just saying having the balls to be illegal. And then you are just being illegal. And that's a problem. We can't complain about them being illegal, and our answer to them being illegal is us being illegal. Well, I bloody hate these ruffians that are going around the neighborhood, smashing up people's flower beds and front walls and stuff. So I'm going to go round to, I don't know, their houses and burn their house down. It's like, okay, yeah, probably. That's vigilantism, and we watch lots of films where we're like, yeah, go for that, and that's that kind of moral acceptance that we like. Yeah, I love it when Dirty Harry goes and works outside of the law to take it to the bad guys. But in reality, if we did really allow vigilantism to take place, you would have complete chaos and everyone taking the law into their own hands. The idea is that we should have a system whereby our law does that effectively. So we should have a system where the UN is more robust and is able to be brought to bear against Russia, so that we should have a legal system whereby those frozen Russian assets can be appropriated. Anyway, spent too long on that. Azerbaijan has sent another state-backed oh no, this is electrical equipment to Ukraine. Azerbaijani media has reported the aid was organized by the Energy Ministry. Actually, this should be in my later section. On the orders of President Ilham Aliyev, official data says aid since the war began totals $45 million. So it's really great that Azerbaijan, otherwise in the sphere of influence of Russia, is assisting Ukraine there, but that's in the energy sector. We're going to come on to that later. Italy has allocated about 900,000 euros to boost cybersecurity in Ukraine's Ternopil region under the Tallinn mechanism. The Italian Foreign Ministry has reported the funding covers equipment upgrades, secure networks and staff training. One presumes that that's where the Ukrainian cyber centers are set up in Ternopil then, if that money is going to Ternopil. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to show that. Really good news there. That's obviously super important. Another aspect of this war. Okay, I'm going to come on to that from what the existence just said. Okay, in fact, we're going to come on to that now. Hey, somebody just said something. Somebody just said, they exist. Said Canada should buy a few F-35 for use and also for PR with the USA. Small price to pay for healing the public and new crib for Trump's ego. Okay, what's happening here is we're getting some news that essentially the Americans are going to buy 88 F-35s off the Canadians are going to buy 88 F-35s off the Americans, and then Trump threatened Canada with being the 51st state of America, and so the Canadians are buying the legally required minimum, which is it 16 or 18, something like that. They're buying 16 or 18 F-35s, and then they're like, whoa, you've really annoyed us, so we're going to look at what alternatives there are for F-35s. And they've looked at Gripen, and Gripen Saab is made by Saab. Saab have said, if you buy a load of Gripen, then you can build these Gripen in Canada, and you can have 10 to 12,000 jobs straight away, and then that will affect the supply chains and so on and so forth. And it looks like the rumors are that Canada is actually going to do that, that the Gripen deal is going to be signed off. The military news here says the Swedish defense company Saab is offering Canada the supply of 72 Jazz 39 Gripen EF fighters. So it looks like they'll get even more Gripens, and 6 Global Eye. So this is very important. Airborne Early Warning and Control AWACS aircraft as an alternative to the US F-35A Lightning II fighters that they were going to buy. And my suggestion was exactly what was just said by They Exist, which is, if I was Canada, I would be saying, right, we'll buy the bare minimum of American F-35s, and we'd probably add another, 10 onto there, but we're not buying 88. And then we'll buy the rest of that stuff will be Gripens, and then we'll have some of these AWACS planes that are really useful, especially since there's a real long waiting list on the wedge tails, the E7 wedge tails, the American kind of version, the Boeing version. So someone then asked Mark, Jono, do we know whether the Saab AWACS aircraft that Sweden donated to Ukraine have finally arrived? Yes, they're both in use, I believe, and that interestingly has also left Sweden without any of their own aircraft. So Sweden now, if I'm correct in saying, no longer have any of these Saab AWACS aircraft, and they are waiting to have their own built by themselves, which I think will come in 2027. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, they are, and I think they've been incredibly important for Ukraine as well. we've got some philosophical debate to be had here. I'm going to come to that in a little while, but thanks for your comments. We'll go through them. So anyway, I just thought I'd give you the update on the Gripens there. It looks like Canada is going to do that, but that will no doubt annoy the Americans. So maybe buy a few F-35s, a few extra F-35s, and then the rest Gripens. That's how I would manage the situation. Right, then we have this. So payback for AUKUS. This is what I said earlier. French and US defense contractors are powerful industrial lobbies and rightly see the UK's competition problems with accessing EU funding and integration of UK weapons on the F-35 are both linked to these defense industry lobbies. So not only is France opposing the effort to put these missiles or to give these missiles to Ukraine, but I guess the claim here is that actually whoever make Lockheed Martin, if they make the F-35s, are making it difficult to put these missiles on the F-35. So you have to put the American missiles on there instead. So, you know, that's a challenge. Right. Okay. Before we get to Ukrainian weapons, the kind of indigenous Ukrainian weapons, let's have a little bit of a drop in with you guys and see what's you are saying in the live comments, etc., etc. I want to make sure all my tabs are also loaded because they have a tendency when I have so many to go into dormancy and then they have to load up again. Right. Anyway, that's not very interesting. Let's get to your wonderful comments. Thank you for being here and doing all of this. Right. First of all, just some big thanks to Johnny Nevergaard and Norwegian Love there. And here we come back to Nut again. So if I get this right, Nuti Kadaija 666. JP, how about brainstorming sessions so we can find European alternatives to ChatGPT, Meta, etc.? Let's find substitutes for US tech monopolies. This is a really good question. And Benny Pye can put a couple of links, I'm sure, because he's in the background. Benny, if you can add the links of it, there's one called bankrupttrump.org and one is a EU. So it won't be very good if you're British, but it's better if you support European tech. There's a very good site called EU Alternatives. I don't know what the link is that does do that. Now, the problem is there are certain things that just don't exist. Like, for example, the equivalent to Meta. So Facebook doesn't really have a European equivalent, or if there are equivalents, they are much smaller. And the value of Facebook, right? The reason why Facebook was so good originally is that everyone was on it. And the point is, you want somewhere where you can access anyone and everyone. You'll find all your old school friends reunited. Don't need that. Got Facebook. You know, your photos uploading, and you can show it all the people, and you can be different groups. If everyone's there, it has that value. So if you're going to replace something like that is much smaller, then it's automatically not going to have that value until many years down the road, and therefore you're substituting for a poorer version of the thing you already have. And that's a problem, not just with stuff that needs more users like a social media platform, but some alternatives will just not be as good because they're not as proven, the companies aren't as big or whatever. So you're always going to have that challenge of like, oh yeah, I'm boycotting this company, and now I'm using this company. Oh, it turns out this company's shite. So I boycotted and now I'm in a worse position, but at least I feel good about myself type thing. So there's always that. But yeah, if I'm sure it won't just be Benny. I'm sure many people can find the alternatives and put them up. Here's one of them. Ronnie's done this. So European alternatives.eu categories. And that's the main one, which is really, really good. And I think there are more being added, and people are really taking it seriously at the moment. Benny then adds, alternative to ChatGPT, Mistral in France, Leonardo AI Australia, Cohere Canada, off the top of my head, or choose a local model location on your laptop. So yeah, so that's for ChatGPT. And I was looking, something came up on Benny. Am I on Mastodon? I don't know. I can't remember. Benny's just helping me out with loads of IT stuff like that. There might be automatic posting to Mastodon, but I'm not on there personally myself. But anyway, that might be happening. But anyway, yeah, I saw something today on European AI, and there's something else that's happening at the moment in Europe in terms of rehoming investments. So European, I think, investment has just gone up exponentially. So I think over the last few weeks, people have said, right, we need to put money in our own rather than invest in American stocks and shares. People are now investing back in Europe and putting European money there. So that might promote innovation as well, and so on and so forth. Okay, Karen Spanuk here says, per Scott Galloway, unsubscribe from ChatGPT and OpenAI. So Scott Galloway's really interesting. Prof Galloway, or the Prof G podcast, and Raging Moderates. He's really good to listen to. He lives in London now. Actually, he's American, but I think he's going to go back to America. He's really good. A 10% drop will need to be reported and will crash all tech stocks. Then we'll see changes in the US. I wonder whether TikTok will have people dropping out. But the problem is with the only people that will drop out of places like TikTok, because they're censoring at the moment, will be essentially liberals who are being censored from talking about Epstein and criticizing Trump. And generally, like, I don't know if that's enough to trigger like that their decisions are bad decisions and change behavior. If you just got one sort of subsection of the one niche demographic, or I know it's sizable, but yeah, it's so fascinating to see what's going to go on in the tech world, and just in terms of like Europeans, how serious they are at feeling like the United States is threatening them through Greenland and through trade wars and whatnot, and whether boycotts go anywhere, and whether this is just a good opportunity for Europe to shore up its own economies and its own startups. So what's happened traditionally, and I know this is going kind of off the military aid topic here, but I think you can make connections in terms of startup companies like the ones you're seeing in drones. So we can connect this, is that America attracts the startups, and they attract the startups because the funding in the United States is very different. Like the way that things get funded means it's much easier to get funding as a startup. And so what you get are these big universities or big areas of innovation in Europe. And you can talk about, like in the UK, the Oxford to Cambridge corridor, which has huge numbers of startups. But when they get to a certain level, they end up just going to the United States to scale. And so we're quite good, I guess, in Europe of producing the ideas, and then the US is really good at nurturing that and turning it into a real viable economic entity. And what Europe needs to work out is how to keep the people and the startups and the innovation housed in Europe without going abroad. So they're going to have to compete in terms of funding and all the other things. Probably not just funding, it'll be regulation, insurance, I don't know, all these other things that mean that startups are much more likely to take place in the United States. Mark Bisque, good to have you on board, Mark. Please never stop speaking uncomfortable truths about the war, JP. It's part of what brought us all to you in the first place. Thank you for that. I mean, I've been pretty down on Ukraine, not down on them, just like being quite brutal about the situation at the moment in the war. And the situation is the energy crisis in Ukraine is freaking terrible. And it is, I think Ukraine are in a way more precarious position than they like. From a war point of view, not too much has changed along the front lines in the last 6 months. In fact, I think Russia has weakened quite considerably. Russia has weakened more than Ukraine has weakened on the front line. But Russia have really hurt Ukraine in the energy infrastructure. Ukraine has hurt Russia in terms of oil, that kind of energy, but not so much in the production of energy so that you have heat and power. They're doing it in certain places. Belgorod's really horrible at the moment. There are rumors, Russians are putting rumors that the Ukrainians are getting ready to attack into Belgorod. And I was thinking, goodness me, maybe the energy, taking out the energy in Belgorod could be a precursor to an attack, one of these kind of like they did into Kursk, but into Belgorod. That would be interesting. But yeah, anyway, that aside, like there are certain areas where they have hit energy production, but generally it's more like oil refineries to hurt them economically. Now, Ukraine not having power is much bigger. I can't believe I had these arguments with people who were like, they can just import it from Poland, or like stop dooming. You can just blah blah blah. No, you can't just do that. And if you do look to do these things, then it still takes months to put into place. And you need heat and energy now in the depth of winter, and you need to produce energy for your military industrial complex to produce weapons for you. So why are we not seeing as many FP1s and 2s and 5s? Why are we not seeing as many Lutis and other like weapons being used on a nightly basis? My speculation is that the military industrial complex has been hurt, either bombed directly or doesn't have the power. And you can't just go one night, oh, it turns out that the substation's been blown out all in, in, I don't know, Vinnytsia area. Oh, all the substation's been hit. Oh, that's all right. Just give Poland a call and you can get it in from Poland. Like, hi, is that Radoslav Sikorski? Yeah. Oh, all right, mate. This is the Oblast of Vinnytsia. Can you just send us loads of power, please? It doesn't work like that, right? The whole infrastructure, you need substations and you need, interconnectors and pylons. And when these things get blown up, Poland's existence is irrelevant, right? You can't deliver the power you've got. Okay, I can get some power across the border from Poland. Brilliant, right? But I can't put it around Ukraine to the places that need it. When Zelensky says to Ukroboronprom, the Ukrainian defense manufacturer, you need to get 50% of your energy from abroad, you've got a problem. Ukraine's in trouble. So I cannot tell you how much at the moment I think Ukraine is in trouble with their energy, and Russia knows it, and they are pushing that every night. They're just like, well, what other substations can we hit? What other energy infrastructure? Oh, Lviv gas, bang, blow that up. Oh, Odessa, blow that up. And they're just going around like picking on the energy infrastructure, and it is absolutely, it's what they scarequote should have done 3 years ago, but they didn't really. I don't know. They probably didn't have the number of drones and missiles. And I think also what the change is now is that the Chinese are probably providing targeting data, so probably getting a lot better satellite imagery from the Chinese, so that they're just more able to do that. But yeah, thanks, Mark. Jeff Test Pilot. I worked for 14 years for the Canadian Department of National Defence as a civilian large edition. Even back then, the price of military equipment, spare parts, etc., is staggering. Yeah, there is a lot of money involved. I used to work in education, and like, goodness me, you can go down the local pound shop and buy a stapler. You get an education catalogue out, and you're leafing through it. Yeah, have a stapler. It's £15. You're like, what? They just know it's like local government, or like schools are like government, and they just education catalogs. They just whack up the price for anything and everything. Contractors going around schools. Oh, you want a new window put there? Well, they've asked for me to do that across the road, and it costs them 200 quid. But you're a school, so it'd be 1,200 quid. It's just the way it goes. And I guess there's a lot of R&D involved in military equipment production, but yeah, I'm sure that there are some very large margins. Right, Sophie from Belgium. For every Rafale and Gripen sold in peacetime partners, one older Gripen and one Mirage can be released for delivery to Ukraine. It's exactly what is happening with the Swedish Gripen. So at the moment, the idea that I understand is that Ukraine are going to be receiving Gripens for every Gripen EF. They're going to be getting Gripen CDs that Sweden operate. As Sweden replace their 60 Gripens or 60 CDs, they're going to be getting 60 new EFs, and those will replace the CDs, and those CDs go to Ukraine. That's what I understand, and I'm going to love the day I see the first Ukrainian Gripen fly in the air. But yeah, generally that's exactly right. Right, okay. Jeff Tespilot, it would be a shame if somehow Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff disappeared from the scene. Yes, this is nothing I disagree with there at all. Okay, Paul Guda Deberitz, hey, good to have you on board, mate. We do have a separate fund for support for Ukraine that is managed by the UK. Yes, that can be used towards US and UK weapons. That's correct. Or anywhere for that matter. SAFE is for and by the EU. Yeah, this is correct. So that mechanism is, there is a mechanism that European countries have put money towards. It was actually before the SAFE thing. SAFE is not for Ukraine. SAFE is a mechanism to bolster European defense by borrowing cheaply, so that the EU and is not so dependent on the US security umbrella, and also buying from the US. So SAFE is really for EU countries, but they can put it towards helping Ukraine. So it's kind of like you can do both, or you buy stuff for yourself, and there's stuff that you're getting rid of you can get to Ukraine or whatever, however you want to do it. The other one was a purely for Ukraine, and it's a fund that is managed by the British. I forget the name of it. I'm sure you guys know it in the live chat, but yeah. And Canada has joined SAFE. Why can't Britain? I think Britain has, and then they wanted to change we had to jump through some more hoops in order for, say, BAE system to access it and whatnot. And I don't know if we are at the moment, or whether we were, and then they kind of changed the hoops we had to jump through. So I'm not sure about that. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. So I'm going to move my face over to there. And we are now going to go on to what Ukraine is doing, although this is actually with Germany as well. So Ukraine plans to build 7 military drones in 2026. Sorry, not 7. 7 million. Nearly double this year's 4 million, nearly quadrupled 2.2 million that were made in 2024. So that is a phenomenal number of drones. For comparison, the US reportedly makes 100,000 a year. 7 million drones for this next year. And if that is the case, and if they can do that, then the skies are just so. There was a report that came out that was, shall I find it? I'm sure there was something from, was it Jay in Kiev on Twitter? There was something like Russians complaining that they can't move anywhere because drones are just absolutely hammering them. And the idea is that that's with 4 million drones built a year. Imagine what it would be like with 7 million drones. Absolutely insane. But I don't know if I can remember where that was. Oh my goodness. And when someone like Jay in Kiev is producing 8,000 things, here we go. No, it's something else. I can't find it. I can't remember where it was. But anyway, this idea is that there are elements of, and it'll be the same for Ukrainians with a lot of Russian drones around. There's an element of just they're unable to. Oh no, I think I might. Do I have it for tomorrow? Sorry about this. I come across so many things, and then they're all in my brain somewhere, and many get forgotten, but some are like they pop up and no, I don't have it. Damn it. Yeah. Anyway, it was something to do with just the inability for Russians to move, and it was Russians complaining that I haven't got it for tomorrow, but I must have lost the link. It was a Russian complaining that their troops aren't even getting to hold weapons and go and fight the Ukrainians, that they're getting killed before they even remotely get to the front line. It was fascinating. It was like a real whinge that we are sending these guys to be killed without even really sending them into battle. And that is the prevalence of drones in certain areas of the front line, right? And if that's the case with 4 million drones, what's it going to be like with 7 million drones? Now, of course, more drones, you need more operators, you need more trained pilots and more teams and so on and so forth. So there is a boots on the ground issue, but that's why Robert Brovdi, Magyar, is trying to recruit another 15,000 people. And you're probably more likely to be able to recruit drone operators than frontline sort of trench troops, if you like. So Anyway, Ukrainian ingenuity, drone battery power has almost doubled. The Ukrainian company developed a much stronger lithium battery. This is what Richard Woodruff was saying the other day, that they've got drones that can go further and much faster than previously, which means drones can either fly twice as far or carry twice as much for the same battery weight. Advances like these help us stay ahead of the invaders. In other words, the energy density of those batteries is being improved. That's how I'd understand it. I'm no battery, um, genius, but I assume the battery dense. Oh, there, bloody it says it. Oh, damn it! I so often do this. I'm like, yeah, that's what it means, and it literally says it in either the tweet or the article. Batteries with high energy density created for drones in Ukraine. Yeah, so the density is being improved, so you can have the same weighted battery but twice as powerful or has twice as much longevity. Now, drones are being used very often with Starlink. I've already had my whinge today about Elon Musk not turning off Starlink for Russian users, which is something he could do, but clearly decides he doesn't want to do. So yeah, that's frustrating. But anyway, these are really useful because, as Richard Woodruff said the other day, the benefit of Starlink operated drones, or Starlink drones that can navigate by Starlink, is that Starlink sitting on top of the drone, that terminal, sends a message up to the satellite, and then that sends a message down to the operator. So in order to interfere with that message, you have to get in between the Starlink and the satellite, and also you have to do it really accurately because satellites are moving as well, and there's lots of satellites. So actually, it's very, very difficult to interfere, to jam Starlink. Effectively, realistically, it's kind of impossible unless you have a big blimp above these things doing all sorts of stuff. So these are kind of unjammable. And that is a massive problem for the opposition, right? As they are becoming more and more prevalent. I guess, if a Starlink, what is the cost of a Starlink? It's going to be a matter of a couple of hundred for the terminal. I don't know. I'm just guessing there. Really, it's on the subscription usually. But for the terminal itself, if they're cheaper than the, I don't know, you just keep your subscription going and say, right, I need a new terminal. So you send these up. That's what, adding a couple hundred to that drone. So like a $300 drone or $400 drone, maybe like a $600 drone. So it's not like massively an issue. It's just costing a bit more. But if you can't jam it, then we need one drone to do what we were needing 3 drones to do before, because they kept getting jammed. And then this can go and maybe you can use these as repeater drones that then repeat down to other drones that are the FPV drones. So these are like mothership Starlink drones that hang around in the air. They repeat back to these other drones that go around and fly into stuff and blow up, and then you're not losing the Starlink terminal each time. So anyway, I presume that, I'm just kind of spitballing here. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I presume that something like that's an option, and it just means that they are developing these capabilities as the war goes on. And it's all about, not having your drones jammed. Now, Alexander Kamyshin, the top-notch guy that used to be in charge of the railways, then was in charge of strategic industries. Then he was taken into, well, he's lost his top knot now. He's taken it. He was taken into Zelensky's inner circle, but he's still strategic industries advisor. Alexander Kamyshin said Ukraine plans to set up at least 10 joint defense projects in Europe this year. The first, already launched in Germany, will produce drones for Ukraine. The goal is to expand European-based manufacturing and financing for Ukraine's defense sector. So this is obviously going to give them safety. What I was talking about with regard to power and getting blown up, as far as being a drone manufacturer, a missile manufacturer, whatever, in Ukraine, there are loads of risks. 10 joint defense projects with European nations this year. That's brilliant. Safety. European nations are going to like it because they get employment and tax dollars and whatnot. All good. Ukraine, together with the American company Palantir, I mean, the problem is Palantir is probably an amazing company for its capabilities, but it's run by psychopaths. Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, who is just batshit crazy and not the sort of guy I'd trust. I trust him as far as I could throw him. Launched the Brave One data room platform for testing and training new artificial intelligence models for military use. Goodness me, I wonder whether Palantir then gets to access all these different AI models and the data it's scraping from all the AI models, putting it into its own knowledge base, and then using that to help the United States big time. So Palantir, very, I wouldn't trust Palantir one iota, but anyway, they're heavily involved, it seems, with the Ukrainian military there. Okay, so where are we? In Ukraine, they've started restoring engines from downed Russian Shahed drones, kamikaze drones, for use in their own drones, which is good. Yeah, recycling. I'm all for recycling. Good stuff. Right, before we get onto the energy section, let's just have a couple more of your comments. Make this as interactive as possible. So, yep. Poor Doris, and Doris does get she's had a tough life, Doris, I can tell you. She's beaten up, she has a house ruined, but she's also playing loud music, and she had it coming, I'll tell you. Anyway, so what else do we have? Russia has to be convicted in absentia of the crime of aggression, says Cheryl Watley. I never know it's Watley or Waitley. I think it's Watley. Putin needs to be convicted of genocide in absentia and all assets confiscated. I think we need to prosecute Russia and Russians and Putin as much as possible. And this is what Zelensky was talking about, this tribunal that has seemed to be progressing at snail's pace. And he mentioned that at Davos. And actually, yeah, there's a need to see that gather momentum. And also, this is something that I don't speak nearly enough about. Kathy's guess is absolutely right. Damages to recover the stolen children. This is something that they are working on a lot. There is a lot of discussion on this, and a lot of thinking goes into this from Ukrainians, obviously. But I don't report it nearly enough. Yeah. The debate to debate law when there is no functional legal body seems rather futile. And the problem is exactly that. So even in like domestic terms with regard to I've got one of my sons playing with a baby out there making lots of noise. Yeah, domestically speaking, if you have really good laws but then the police don't enforce them, or the jurisprudential sector doesn't follow through, no one goes to court, or they're not successfully prosecuted, then the law means nothing. So you're absolutely right. Law only means something if you have the decent law, the enforcement of the law, and then the prosecution of the law. All of those are really, really important. Hang on. And I think that's that's a really well made point there, Mitch. So therefore, in the international domain, we have the UN, to some degree, I guess you can say the EU and NATO and so on and so forth. But the UN is super important, and the UN seems to have been sidelined in this war and shown to be irrelevant. It is not irrelevant. The UN is super important. We need the UN to be as robust and as kind of powerful, I don't know if that's the right word, as possible. But unfortunately, it seems to have gone by the wayside to some degree. But yeah. This made me laugh. Paul Gouda Debritz. Hi, Ronnie. Somebody made you a spanner. Congratulations. In British slang, calling someone a spanner is a derogatory term, but he's a mod and he has a spanner by his name. But that made me laugh. Right. Talking about what I was just saying, Just Not Good says laws are relative. They steal children from abusive parents to protect them. How much money is a 2-day old child worth? Use the money, save the child, worry later. And that is one way of looking at it, which is just to hell with it. We'll use that money for greater good, and it would be using money for the greater good, but it'd still be illegal. And it's whether you can justify, the idea that two wrongs make a right is thoroughly logically problematic. The idea is that two wrongs don't make a right. But the idea here is that two wrongs do make a right, and it's not immediately clear that that's the best way to go. Because if you say, well, we're okay for breaking the law now, it's because they've broken the law and we're going to make this better, this whole situation better by us breaking the law, then other people say, well, you broke the law over there, so we can do that now. And it's just like looking at what the US is doing with regard to Greenland and with regard to Venezuela. This is it, and blowing up those boats in the Caribbean. This is what's so important to look at that and say, you can't break the law. You might think it's better that those boats don't exist because they're full of drug smugglers. Asterix, they weren't, arguably. But assume that what the US was saying was correct. You can't blow up all of those boats because you think it's good, because it's still illegal. And if you do that, then anyone else who are bad dudes around the world looks at that and says, you have no right to stop us doing that. So if you go and kidnap Maduro, you might think that that's a good thing to do, but it's still internationally illegal to do that in a sovereign nation and steal their oil. Now you just give them Ukraine and Russia. You give them Russia and China permission to do that. Taiwan's not long for the world type thing. So it's really dangerous. If we start the floodgates open, you open a Pandora's box if you say it's okay if we break the law here. But I get the desire to do that, because those frozen Russian assets, it would be better if they could be used. Of course, it would be better. And this is the divergence of morality, good and bad, better. The divergence of that on an individual evaluation, divergence from legality, whether it's legally right and legally wrong to do something. It's different from morally right and morally wrong. People often confuse the two, but they are actually two separate ideas. But I really appreciate your comment there. Which is the worst decision? Take money, save a child, or do nothing and the child dies? Okay, so here's where it gets a problem. Because if you look at that calculation, this is where we do a bit of philosophy, right? Sorry to go off on one, but this is really important. If you look at that calculation in isolation, then you can say, well, obviously it's better to use that money now, the frozen Russian assets now, and to help Ukraine, and they prevail in the war, and that was good. And that's looking in this really in the micro. But the problem is, I keep talking about opening Pandora's box, because you've got to look at that in a macro and saying, okay, what's the long-term damage of breaking the law in order to make something better because they've broken the law over there? And it's the Pandora's box argument. Well, if that justifies China invading Taiwan, then suddenly you breaking the law here has allowed China to invade Taiwan. So it's not just looking at the evaluation of the paying money to save children over here, but actually then that allows, unfortunately, these guys over here to do some crazy stuff. And then, this is the Venezuela argument, which is, you might think that's good in the context of just looking at Venezuela or just looking at those drug boats, but what does it allow on a much bigger scale and a much longer term? So I when I talk about this is moral consequentialism. So moral consequentialism is justifying an action by the consequences it obtains. This is not legality. This is how we do some moral evaluations. Not everyone does it. Famous thought experiment is the trolley experiment. You've got 5 people working on a train line, and you've got a trolley hurtling towards them. It's going to kill them. Do you pull the lever so it diverts and it kills one other person, but it saves those 5? Turns out about 89% of people will pull that lever and it diverts and kills the one person but saves the 5. That's moral consequentialism. A smaller evil killing this one person for a greater good, saving those 5. But then when we say, Okay, would you push someone significantly large enough to stop the trolley off a bridge that then stops the trolley, saves a 5? Same calculation, kills 1, saves 5. Turns out that the percentage of people that would do that reverses. So people are fine with pulling a lever, but if you have to literally kill someone yourself with your own hands by pushing them off the bridge, then we're not happy to do that. And that's kind of how nuclear weapons, atom bombs are dropped over Nagasaki, because you'll pull a lever that drops a bomb. Brilliant, I've killed 100,000 people. That was easy. But if you had to go and take a gun and shoot 100,000 people one by one in the face, fewer people are likely to do that. So there's a really big aspect of psychology that takes place here. But that's kind of moral consequentialism. Now, there are lots of different types of moral consequentialism. You know, there's about a dozen different forms of moral consequentialism. And so it gets quite confusing as to how you do the calculation. Here's an example that I often give, which is like, you've got $5, £5, whatever, $10, £10. You give it to a homeless guy. You're like, there you go, mate. Oh, that's brilliant. Right, yeah, I've done a good thing. You've got £10, and that's great. And if this person goes and spends it on a hot meal and a coffee, that's great. You've done the world a favor. £10 well spent. The consequence of that is good. But say that guy then takes and your intentions, and this is where we can look at intentions versus consequences. So my intention is that the world's a better place. I give this to you. So I give you that. You go and do something wonderful with it, or get a hot meal. Great. But I intend you to do something positive, but you take that money and you spend it on drugs. I'm like, damn it. So now this guy's addicted to drugs. He'd never taken drugs before. He's now taken drugs. So at my £10 has got this person addicted to drugs. Damn it. Now that changes the equation there, but my intentions were still the same. Okay. Then what happens? So that's measuring it over, say, 2 weeks, right? But then imagine that this guy gets addicted to drugs and then reforms, right? And then starts helping people to come out of drug addiction, right? So if I measure it on a 5-year basis, so I measure it on a 2-week basis, oh, it's really bad now. A 5-year basis, actually, is really good. He's made loads of people much better after being addicted to drugs, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe 2 years later, he becomes a mass murderer. And oh no, now it's bad. So in other words, where do we cut off the time for measuring the consequences of an action that we do? So moral consequentialism is kind of intuitively what we all do. We all kind of use moral consequentialism as a rule of thumb, but it starts getting complicated when you're like, well, how do I work it out? And where do I stop? Like, and it's not just we're thinking linearly there of one person, did it like a bunch of dominoes, but what if all of these effects go out into a multitude of different areas? So that person got that £10, then did this, and then did that, and then it's like, okay, well, what about? It doesn't matter what he does, but it's what I intend for him to do. My intention was that this was he becomes a better person, or has a nice hot meal. And then it's like, well, okay, but therefore it's incumbent upon you to understand the probability of what this guy is likely to do. So then before you give him a £10, you need to go and research what percentage of homeless people are going to spend £10 on drugs against a hot meal, against this, against that. So, you know, then it puts the onus back on you to actually make sure that your intentions are more likely to be realized, right? And so there are so many ways of having to look at this. So my point is that we don't know as well. So like, it could be that we confiscate all that money and there's no bad effects to that, but we have broken the law in confiscating that money. Or it could be that China says, okay, that's giving us permission to invade Taiwan, but we don't know. So how much is incumbent upon us to work out what the probability is and what the likely outcome is of us breaking the law, and how that might affect the behavior of other entities and nations. Hopefully this all kind of makes sense. Like, we just need to be really careful if we're saying it's okay for us to break the law, but everyone else breaking law is bad. Like, Russia broke the law, so we're now going to break the law to make it better for them. But you can't break the law because we broke the law here. Like China, you can't break the law. We broke the law for good reasons. You can't, you know, it becomes legally really, really difficult. I hope it was worth getting into this. I know. Yeah, nice. I see what you did there, Maximilian Danton. For those who, I can't believe you're talking about the categorical imperative. I actually wasn't talking about the categorical imperative. So Kant's categorical imperative is it's categorically wrong to do something. So in other words, to break the law, to lie or whatever. So Kant would say that it's categorically wrong to lie. And then the argument against that, which is lying is always bad. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter the consequences of the lie. Lying is always categorically wrong. It's imperative that you do not lie, and that's categorically the case. Then you have the inquiring murderer thought experiment, which is like, you've got Jack and Jill upstairs in the top bedroom. They're playing, these two kids playing, and the local child murderer comes around. He's like, I'm just looking for a couple of kids, Jack and Jill. I wouldn't mind murdering them. Do you know where they are? Like, and you'd be like, yeah, I do know where they are. But if I tell him where they are, he's going to go and murder them. So I'm going to say, no, I think last time I saw them, I think they were 2 miles down there, just playing on a train line. You want to go and look for them there? They were right on the train line. Make sure you look around the train lines for a long time. Do you lie? Is it good? Like, that's a lie, which brings about a greater good, which is those two kids now survive, right? But Kant would say it's just wrong to lie. So, and this we get to talk about deontology and whether there are outside our brains these truths, if you like, this kind of moral framework that my opinion is that if all humans were to die, morality would die with it. And if all sentient life was to cease to exist, morality would cease to exist. It's a construction that exists because we construct it conceptually, and concepts die with us. And there isn't morality that exists outside of us. So when people talk about objective morality, to me, that doesn't make sense. You cannot have objective morality, because once all sentient life ceases to exist, there isn't a moral law out there. And this, you can talk about mathematics, whether mathematics exists outside of our brains or whether inside it is constructed by us. Is mathematics a thing that exists out? Is there mathematical formalism? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're going off on one. Let's talk about military aid to Ukraine. Jesus. This is what happens when you ask me questions like this. But thank you for the super chats and whatnot. And it was a nice dalliance, a nice sort of skip and a jump through the flowery meadows of moral philosophy. Right. Okay. We're going to go on to energy now. And we're going to start the energy section with this, which is, I think, a problem. So Austria's far-right party, the FPO, has demanded to stop giving aid to Ukraine after Russia's 256 energy attacks left millions freezing in minus 15 degrees Celsius. This comes as analysts note Russia's energy strikes are designed for humanitarian disaster to trigger migrant waves. I presume here is they don't want to allow the war to continue too much longer. Do they want Ukraine to just lose? But then you're going to get huge waves of migration going from Ukraine into places like Austria. So I don't know. Anyway, yeah, not a fan of that from Austria. From the FPO. Now, G7 plus partners have pledged over 6,000 generators and power units to Ukraine, plus 60 million euros. We'll come to this in a second, from Germany, and over 400 million dollars from the US. I've not heard of the US amount there, but it'd be interesting to see what budget that's coming from. Now, Japan is to provide $6 billion in humanitarian and technical aid to Ukraine in 2026. Japan's already delivered over 2,500 generators, 65 transformers, and other equipment, with total aid exceeding $15 billion. So Japan is quietly getting on and being very, very supportive of Ukraine there, which is fantastic. The EU sends 447 generators worth 3.7 million euros to Ukraine. The EU is providing Ukraine with 447 emergency generators from its strategic reserves, with the hope of restoring electricity supply in the face of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. So EU coming up with some stuff there. France will supply Ukraine with the equivalent of 13 extra megawatts of electricity, representing 100 generators to replace destroyed infrastructure. The foreign minister said that France will also will hold a call today with the G7 countries as well as the Nordic and Baltic states to coordinate support for Ukraine's energy grid. Hundreds of thousands of people have been left without power and heating following Russian bombings there, and I think that's probably connected to that G7 announcement I just made. Finland has transferred 70 humanitarian cargoes to Ukraine for the restoration of energy infrastructure, according to Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal. These are power transformers, generators, mobile boilers, electric motors, cables, components for the repair and modernization of the system. Fantastic again from Finland. Australia, you flaming hoons. Australia sends another 6.9 million bloody dollars to help, to help Ukraine's power grid survive the harshest winter since the invasion began. Total Australian support since 2022 now tops $1.2 billion as Russia keeps targeting power plants and heating facilities. Struth. They need more barbecues. No, we shouldn't joke. Energy is definitely an issue, and you could see Australia getting on board there. I feel safe doing an Australian accent. Don't ask me when we get to the amount of aid that India has given them. Please don't ask me to do that. And the Chinese aid, yeah, it's not going to happen. Euromaidan Press says Russia struck Kiev's grid 3 times in 11 days, 6,000 buildings lost, heating at minus 15 degrees centigrade. Poland's response is send 400 plus generators from state reserves, plus 42,609 citizens who raised $1.3 million in 6 days. They had to double the fundraising goal after reaching it, and that itself was an announcement from 6 days ago. So goodness knows what Poland has delivered since and done since. This is from 2 days ago. A total of 130 generators of various capacities have already been delivered to Kiev from Poland. The fundraising campaign in Poland for them was launched just 10 days ago, and they will be connected today. Overall, more than $2 million has been raised for Ukraine as part of the Heat from Poland for Kiev charity campaign. Another 100 generators were received by Polish volunteer initiatives working in Ukraine. The next shipment will arrive in the coming days, Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has stated. Now, in response to that, though, the Polish government is warning that Russia is currently running a large-scale disinformation campaign operation to convince audiences that Ukrainians are selling generators gifted from Poland. Now, this is a real worry. Posts circulating online show fake screenshots and captions claiming that Polish generators supposedly provided as aid are being resold on Ukrainian auction sites. The narrative is false and deliberately constructed. Poland supplies generators and heating equipment to Ukraine so civilians can maintain electricity and heat during Russian strikes on energy infrastructure. The recipients of this aid are formally designated by Polish authorities. The process is documented and controlled, and once equipment is transferred, recipients are required to secure it, organize transport, and distribute it to end users. If equipment is misused, the donation can be revoked and the return of equipment or its monetary value can be demanded. Russian information operations routinely impersonate concerned Polish patriots to push the message that helping Ukraine is pointless because aid is being stolen. The goal is to turn allies against each other and erode public support. This tactic is familiar. It's been used repeatedly across Europe by Russia. Now, Germany is to deliver 33 mobile combined heat and power plants. 2 of them will arrive today. The rest will arrive later, said Germany's ambassador Heiko Toms. That was on the 28th. So that's actually today. That's really good news. German aid to Ukraine has some detail here. In addition to the German government, there are numerous associations who are supporting Ukraine by providing emergency power generators en masse. Recently purchased, Ukraine High Life Berlin purchased 3 high-capacity emergency power generators worth more than 42,000 euros for a hospital in Lviv. So that's really good news. Lots going on from Germany. Lithuania sending generators worth over 2 million euros, not 2 euros, 2 million euros. On the Ukraine's Day of Unity, we are sending heat and electricity generators worth over 2 million euros from Lithuania together with Ukraine. Now, On top of that, the Lithuanian government has approved 4 projects to support Ukraine's recovery, which will be financed from the Fund for the Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Aid. More than 14.5 million has been allocated for these projects. So all good news there. And the Netherlands will provide an additional 23 million to support Ukraine's energy sector. These funds will be used to finance gas purchases, urgent repairs of power plants, and the supply of critical energy equipment from Dutch companies, including generators and cables. British have also done this too. I've reported them previously, but don't have the details here. But the British government were very quick to come out and support Ukraine's energy crisis. And the Czechs have already raised over 17 million Czech korunas. This was going back 6 days, so it's going to be way more than that now. That was $800,000 then in less than 24 hours. Huge respect, and that's for buying generators. So really good stuff there from the allies of Ukraine to support with the energy crisis in Kiev, but across Ukraine. Okay, so just to go on to a few more bits and pieces before we get to the final section. Just to let people know, Benny Pie saying you can find atpgeo.com Blue Sky account and the ATP Geo Threads account bridged to the Fediverse, which will appear if you search on Mastodon. But saying that Mastodon is on the list too. So we're trying to get to across all the socials. Thanks to Benny for helping with that. He's mentioned bankrupttrump.org for alternatives outside the US and Russia. And we're going to start posting my videos to Spotify because it's Swedish owned, and stream when we do live streams. We're also going to stream to an Australian outfit called Kick. Some gamers stream to there. I don't understand this stuff, but Benny's well on it. He's a legend for doing this, amongst others, to provide an alternative for US platforms and integrating Ko-fi as a UK option during a stream. So Ko-fi is this alternative to Buy Me a Coffee. Both are there, but if you want to use an alternative that isn't that is in this case British, then Ko-fi is there, and it's linked in the description. So we're just trying to diversify there. Julian Rossiter says, JP, do you think there could be a confrontation between NATO and Russia now that some vessels seem to be getting escorts from the Russian Baltic Fleet? No. The reason I don't is because I actually think that Russia doesn't have the guts to do that, and nor should they. It would just be completely destructive for Russia. So Russia talk a big talk and they'll saber rattle, but if you start taking Russian ships, we're afraid of what Russia do because we think that they are more ballsy than they really are. But Russia is not going to enter into war with NATO. It just won't, surely. And if it does, it's idiotic, because NATO would make short work of the Russian conventional armed forces. It just really would. So I actually think Russia won't do that, and therefore we should be far more robust in our response to Russia. I think we've been way too afraid of Russia for way too long, and it's quite depressing. But there you go. But great question though, and I just think we should start really going to town on the shadow fleet. And again, so this is where you're doing it within the confines of the law. So this isn't a case of like confiscating their money and nicking their money. This is what the British government set out with the 14 European nations have set out very clearly, that we're adhering to all of these laws, all of these norms, all so on and so forth. And if Russian ships aren't doing this, then we are well within our rights to stop that ship and do X, Y, and Z. Now, I don't know that you can justify taking the oil off of those ships and selling it yourselves. That's kind of what Zelensky was suggesting at Davos, I think. Look, the US is doing this with the Venezuelan ships. Why isn't everyone else doing this with the Russian ships? Because that you've got a legal problem there. Yeah, the US is doing that, but they are basically being pirates. They're essentially stealing Venezuelan oil and selling it and putting that money in a freaking account in Qatar. It's absolutely outrageous, and I can't believe the American population is kind of not going mad about that, because I guess it's all right if we do it type thing. Well, yeah, okay, but here, like, I don't know what you do with the cargo on these ships, but nonetheless, detaining them, at the very least, they can't move and sell that. So, because if you detain that ship, then they have to get another ship to go and sell more oil, so that oil is, at least for the time being, lost, or it delays them to the point where that they are selling far less because they're spending so much longer in transit because their ships keep getting delayed, and then they've got to spend money on health and safety, repairing the ship, all these flag issues, GNSS issues, so on and so forth. The issue for allies that do this is the cost incurred of detaining ships. So don't for a moment think that it will be cheap to take a ship, and then who's going to pay for it to be moored, or who's going to pay for it to be detained, or so on and so forth. But I think we should go to town on the Russian Shadow fleet for sure. So Hoobs Groove says, why build so many drones when you could drop ammunition from one drone and reuse it? You could have guided munition. Yes, I mean, they do that too. It's because drones dropping IEDs are not as that you can't fly them down pipes and into trees and whatever. So FPV drones have their uses, and drone bombers have their uses, and Baba Yagas have their uses, and you need, it's not both and, it's not either or, sorry, it's both and they'll work out what's the most cost effective and the way of building and using drones. But yeah, just the answer should just be yes, more drones. I think Ukraine, says Stephen Bendal, is planning on some clever innovation regarding drones, only we know nothing about it because it's secret. I don't know if you know something, Stephen, that we don't. I would hope that's true. They are an innovative lot, but most of what you can do in terms of innovation is going to be copyable by the other side. Unless you have some kind of deep-seated asymmetry advantage where you can do certain things that they can't. Anything that you develop will be copied by the other side at some point, what you would assume. Put when the law fails, people take matters into their own hands. Yeah, and that's the thing. But is that a good thing? And where does it get us? But yeah. Put Starlink onto a few flamingos and see what you can hit. I do. Yeah, this is not a bad idea. I wonder if that's a doable thing. Yes. Lots on morality and stuff. Right, fellow Javi says, by the way, several MPs have broken with Wilders, leaving his party diminished. Yes, 7 as far as I saw. Geert Wilders, the Dutch right-wing politician, the PVV party. Last time I looked, it was 7 politicians have left his party. I've got this for the geopolitics video I've got lined up. I could speak to you forever, guys. I've got so much stuff to speak to you about, but that's part of it. Minority cabinet formation have more chances to survive high Ukraine level of Ukraine support. Yep, and thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that with us. Good news, I think, just generally politically there. So Finnish guy says, some drone blocking technology has been designed for wind turbines on Finland's eastern border, making them multi-purpose rather than a security threat. What do you mean? That actually these act as drone masks that can help act as aerials for drones? I don't know. Interesting. Let me know. Okay, thank you everybody for that. Right, I'm going to get very quickly back to the last part here. I don't want to drone on too long. Do you see what I did? See what I did there? I used the word drone to talk about just talking for too long. So funny sometimes. So we're going to move on to what Russia is doing, and I promise I will try. I will promise I'll try to be quick. I can't promise being quick. Okay, right. Russia. So what are they doing? The Military have published an investigation into Russian defensive procurement showing Russia ordered millions of artillery shells and mortar rounds in 2024 and 2025. Documents reveal growing production of 152mm and 122mm and 120mm ammunitions and rising costs for the precision shells. So they are ordering more and more. I need to look in that in more depth to see what the details are there and see whether it is something to really worry about, because they're ramping up. They're still able to ramp up production, and that is going to be a worry. Now, Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Services First Deputy Chief has claimed that Russia plans to produce 260 new build tanks in 2026. I talked about this morning or yesterday, a 20% increase in 2025. So they are building more new tanks, but they are apparently refurbishing fewer tanks. 40% fewer tanks will be refurbished, but 20% increase in what's built new, which is an overall delivery being down a third. So they're still down a third on previous years. So that is a massive problem. And that's if you believe that they are making 260 brand new tanks a year. We're not seeing them. There's no prevalence of T90 tanks that I'm seeing, or new T80 variants or whatever. So I'm not aware that is definitely something that they can do. But it's certainly going to be the case that they are going to have a decrease in refurbished tanks because they just don't have the stockpiles, and the ones they've got left are the crappiest, most expensive and time-consuming to refurbish. Right, Zelensky's named Taiwan as a source of parts, and he did this in his Davos speech, used in Russian weapons. Taiwan's president has responded by offering talks to tighten controls. Yes, despite export bans since 2022, Taiwanese parts still reach Russian arms factories through intermediary countries. That definitely needs to be looked at. Russian troops are actively using equipment from the American company Ubiquity. Now, this is something that's caused quite a lot of consternation in the last few days. To build communication systems and control drones, according to Hunter Book investigation, Militiani states. Now, there's some images, videos of stuff of this Ubiquity equipment being used. The company's radio bridges make up about 80% of all Russian equipment of this type used at the front. Ubiquity radio bridges, antennas, and network equipment are regularly recorded at the positions of Russian units along the front line in Ukraine. Something needs to be done about that. So that's an American company that is routinely, serially allowing their equipment to be used by the Russians, or I don't know if they allow is the correct word. It ends up getting there. And is there anything Ubiquity could do further to stop that from happening? Russia wants to recruit 67,000 contract soldiers by involving the occupied territories, getting them from occupied Ukrainian territories. They even set plans that about 530 people from the Zaporizhia region should sign contracts. Kherson, 300. The Crimea, over 3,500 from Sevastopol. About 750 from there, from Sevastopol. So, lots of places being seen as potential for Russian recruitment there. Now, Russia produces 3,000 Shaheds monthly. I've seen so many varied figures on this that I just don't know what to think. The claim here is 3,000 monthly, which is 100 a day. So, and launches around 100 daily, each capable of destroying an entire building. Now, does Shahed mean literally just the Shahed Garand type drone, or does it include Gerberas and decoys and whatnot? Because at the moment they're sending more than 100 a day, but it could be that they are actually on average sending 100 a day, and they're stockpiling. So maybe they're sending 60 Shaheds a day and then stockpiling 40 Shaheds a day across 6 days, and then on the 7th day they send all the Shaheds they can. And then on each day, they're sending loads to top them up. They're having Gerbera drones and decoy drones and so on and so forth. But 300 is not as many as people were worrying about previously when they were claiming that to be aiming for 500 a day. And I think Ukraine has stopped them producing drones at massive levels. But the levels they're still able to produce them are still really, really concerning for Ukraine. Ukraine has just partnered with Palantir, as we know, to launch this AI platform that could shift the balance from counting intercepts to technological deterrence. Russia's real drone threat, and I reported this sometime back for Ukraine, isn't mounting manpads on Shaheds, which we are seeing and is a concern. But the real threat is achieving stable communications, enabling real-time FPV control of drones. So that these Shahed drones can act like glorified FPV drones because they have stable communication, piggybacking on Ukraine's internet network or mobile phone network. That's a problem. And then if you're shoving Starlinks on them, even more of an issue. If successful, Shaheds would transform into guided weapons with high operational flexibility. I think they are getting there. Now, the GUR has revealed the characteristics and component base of the new Russian drone, the Garand 5. So given that the Garand 2 is the Shahed equivalent, I think, is it? Anyway, the Garand 5 here looks more like a missile, really. It has a full takeoff weight of 850 kilograms. Its cruising speed of 450 to 600 kilometers an hour. It significantly exceeds the performance of the Grand 3 there. And the flight duration is about 2 hours, so much shorter flight time, but estimated range of still 950 kilometers. These things fly. Maximum altitude is 6 kilometers. Actually recorded use from 200 meters to 3 kilometers, though. And the Chinese Telefly TFT J2000A turbojet engine has a thrust of 200 kgf used to power the weapon. That's 1,960 newtons for anyone that did GCSE economics, GCSE physics. Right, Iran has sold Russia $2.7 billion worth of ballistic and surface-to-air missiles since October 2021, Bloomberg reported. Tehran also provided Shahed 136 attack drones and shared production technology. In total, Russia spent over $4 billion on Iranian military equipment since late 2021. Iran have seriously helped out Russia during the course of this war, as indeed have North Korea. According to Foreign Policy, Moscow is supplying Iran with military gear and surveillance tech to help crush protests, from AK rifles to Spartak MRAPs. They don't really use mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles themselves, the Russians, so I don't know how they're getting into Iran. And deep internet control systems. Russia's backing Tehran's repression, not with troops, but with tools to suppress and survive. Yeah, piece of a pod. Now, I showed you this video previously of a Russian serviceman launching the Yolka interceptor drone at the Ukrainian drone. They are able, and they're still, innovating and producing these things. So don't think Russia is just sitting by and allowing Ukraine to have all the fun with producing new drones and whatnot. This is from January the 19th. I don't know what he was pointing there in the drone direction, whether that was another drone on a gun or something, but anyway, it worked there in both these cases to take out a Ukrainian drone, so they are obviously somewhat effective. Russia, though, is losing money on jet sales to China, and it can't just walk away. According to United 24, Russia is supplying parts for Chinese Su-27 and Su-30 fighters at a loss to avoid angering Beijing. Component costs surged by nearly 200%, but Moscow keeps selling anyway to preserve the partnership. A March 2025 internal letter from Russia's United Aircraft Corporation shows export prices for jet components are no longer competitive. Costs have risen at 193% since 2022 and exceed earlier contract prices by up to 8 times. China, labeled Foreign Customer 156, is sensitive to price hikes. Russian officials warn that raising prices could collapse a contract and damage long-term military ties. The message to manufacturers is blunt: cut prices or risk losing China. That means accepting lower margins or none at all. While Russia's economy is already under strain, China is different from Russia's other arms buyers. Unlike Venezuela or Nicaragua, Beijing pays in full and on time. Losing China would hit both Russia's war economy and its global arms export status. And there you go. So that is today's military aid update with a healthy dose of moral philosophy. I hope that was acceptable to your ears. If not, tough luck. I said it anyway. There's nothing you can do about it now. You ain't going back in time. So sorry, despite what the Hollywood films say. Not yet, anyway. Thanks for a great live. As always, thank you, the pirate, for pirating away in your normal ways, but hopefully not really being a pirate, because they generally just steal things and pillage, and they're not nice. Good to have subscribers on board. I know I'm subscribed. It's first on my list because I wait every morning for the hits and losses, I presume. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to all of you who have done that. So the pirate says, and a lot of thanks to this great community for asking good questions in the chat. Love you all for the engagement. Fun every time. And we are talking about serious issues, and this is, we talk about war crimes and horrific things, but sometimes it's good to have a bit of escapism with some lightheartedness, and there's a lovely community to, a spoonful of sugar helps some medicine go down, as the great Mary Poppins once said. And I think there's some truth to that. And also some truth to, it's never too late to hit the like button, like there's no tomorrow, and subscribe. You want to. It's what all the cool kids do. And we are nothing if not cool kids. Are we saying we should leave justice to the Lord? Says Cheryl, knowing my proclivities. I just channeled Greg. That was a very Greg thing to say. I'm not saying that, and I've got a few books for you that could eschew you of such an opinion. Not you, Cheryl, but one. Yes, I won't spam you with my philosophy books, but if in doubt, check out Jonathan M.S. Pierce on Amazon or any other bookseller, or you could look at my my Johnny Pierce books. If you're bored and you want a decent fiction book to read, you could do no worse than start with Johnny Pierce's Survival of the Fittest, Metamorphosis, and the second one, Adaptation. Or if you've got kids or just want to read a book for yourself that's just a bit of escapism, there's The Curse of the Maya and the A Truth Seeker Story, and the sequel, Grease Lightning, Grease the country, Grease Lightning, which is this is a book that's used by a number of schools for as a kind of set textbook, which is pretty cool. I like that. So if you want to buy some fiction books, go along and look at Johnny Pierce or Jonathan M.S. Pierce, and yeah, that'd be cool. I'd appreciate that. Or don't. It's up to you. Do what you like. So there is atpgeo.com/Jonathan's books. There you go. Benny's got an answer for everything. Are they translated into Finnish? I haven't done that yet. It's not something I've worked on. I really should do the audio books of them as well. It's something I really want to do. But just I spend too long talking to you guys to read a book into a microphone and make sure it's all perfect. We do need some good news. I'll try and bring you some good news, but it's really hard at the moment. Crazy stuff is happening, and it's very difficult to generate good news out of thin air. I will try it. I suppose we could say that the Ukrainian tennis player Elina Svitolina, she reached the Australian Open semi-finals, and that's good. So that's awesome. The EU will establish a $6 billion drone alliance with Ukraine for the joint production of millions of drones. That's a good bit of news. Let's go and have a look at that, shall we? Before I go, this is my long goodbye. Quite frankly, I'm here for it. So let's just give you one more bit of military aid news. We have the EU will establish $6 billion drone alliance with Ukraine for the joint production of millions of drones. As the US shifts priorities to the Indo-Pacific, Europe is building defense autonomy with Ukraine, starting with drones and missile production. That sounds good to me. So excellent. Okay, and I'm going to leave you with that. So there you go. EU's helping build drones with Ukraine. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your support. Thank you for the super chats. You're amazing. Thank you to the mods, including the new mod, Ronnie, Grunge Thing. Appreciate it. Thank you to all of the commenters, all of the subscribers, all of the members. Thank you for being members and helping keep the lights on and whatnot. I really do appreciate it. And if you've only just arrived, you can put it now on 1.5 times speed, and you can listen to me rabbit on at length, even quicker than I speak already. And there you go. You're welcome. Take care. Slava Ukraini, atpgeo.com/donate. Car for Ukraine. That's what we're doing at the moment until we finish that one. Take care. Big love. Thanks to all.